Philosophy and social theory have drawn many portraits of a human being: Homo politicus, Homo economicus, Homo faber, Homo ludens. Sociology has its own image: Homo sociologicus. It is based on 4 assumptions: relational existence, ascription of meaning, existential uncertainty, and normative regulation. Let us look at them a bit more closely. First, the fundamental truth about the people is that they always live in some relation to other people, with others, next to others, for others, but never alone. From birth to death, we live in the interhuman space, surrounded by more or less significant others. The composition of our interhuman space changes. It is like a social convoy, where at some time people drop out, some people appear, and even after our death, we are still surrounded by a funeral conduct composed of our relatives, friends, family, and acquaintances. For me, this is the crucial trait of society. Society is not a holistic entity, some superhuman entity, some presumed social organism or social system which has properties of its own, properties and regularities sui generis. But it is neither a chaotic mass of separate autonomous individuals living their life on their own. Society for me is a network of relations among the people. What happens between and among individuals in the interhuman space. To repeat, society is just what happens between and among individuals in the interhuman space. Second assumption, to our relations with others we ascribe some meaning: personal meaning, our motivations, intentions, reasons, and cultural meaning, shared and accepted by our group, community, and society. We need others for a number of reasons. Without an intimate relation between our parents, we wouldn't have been born. And without maternal and parental care in our childhood, we wouldn't have survived. We need others as suppliers of goods and services that we can't provide for ourselves. We need others as listeners and interlocutors in this most typical human action, namely talking. We need others as partners in cooperation in order to reach goals which can be obtained only collectively, with our share directly dependent on the efforts of others. Finally, we need others as a social mirror in which we can estimate our worth and develop our self-concept. Third assumption, human life is precarious. We are fragile animals exposed to innumerable threats and finally destined to die. Large part of such precariousness is due to our social relational existence, to the unavoidable and indispensable company of other people. We can never be entirely sure how other people will act or how they will react to our actions. We encounter perennial uncertainty, relatively small in the case of family and friends, much larger in the case of superficial and occasional acquaintances, for example, with the medical doctor, car dealer, the plumber, or salesperson. But we have to act nevertheless, therefore we take risks, small and big. Fourth assumption, in the areas which are most central for our life, the social mechanism appears which bridles and limits risk. Some relations are endowed with normative meaning as good, right, and proper, and therefore expected and sanctioned. The relations subjected to normative regulation I will call moral bonds, and the part of interhuman space where they appear the moral space, They make life more livable, bring numerous benefits both to the individuals who act within the moral space and to the groups, communities, societies pervaded with moral bonds. Individuals acquire a sense of existential security and predictability, and generally life satisfaction. Groups manifest more smooth, efficient, and successful functioning. To refer to such benefits, we may speak of individual or collective moral capital. Understanding that the list is not complete, I believe there are 6 moral bonds which make the core of moral space: trust, loyalty, reciprocity, solidarity, respect, and justice. I will be more specific in a while, but first let me consider common general traits of moral bonds. First, how do we know that some relations are good, to be expected and exhorted? One may refer to philosophical considerations and to the codes of ethics. One may apply functionalist reasoning that such relations are indispensable for the survival of society. One may refer to the theory of social evolution, claiming that in the struggle for existence, societies which had not developed moral regulations were extinct. There is also a common sense view, which perhaps is sufficient for our purposes and closest to sociological perspective, namely, that most people on most occasions would consider some relations as welcome and others as wrong. Whether they are participants themselves or just observers, people react positively to the moral bonds like trust, loyalty, reciprocity, solidarity, respect, and justice, and react negatively with repulsion to their opposites, to paranoid suspiciousness, disloyalty and cheating, egoism and exploitation, contempt and injustice. They simply feel more happy to live in a society pervaded with moral bonds and look with awe and envy at societies with a strong moral space. Good, like beauty, is in the eye of the beholder. In this case, the people participating in social life or looking at social life or other groups from the outside. Second, what is the ontological status of moral bonds? The relation may be represented as interaction between concrete individuals, A and B. Then it is just a personal occurrence at a given space and time. It just happens to a couple of people. But it may also be the case that the same type of relation is repeated numerous times by various individuals, A, B, and C, and D, E, F, G, etc., etc. At some level of statistical frequency, people would say, we act like this because it is done. Because it is done this way in our group, in our society. But it may also occur that some type of relation is shared by a large number of group members as if objectified, external to each of them individually, and most important, constraining, obligatory. People would then say, it should be done. Not only it is done, it should be done. At this moment, the moral bond becomes what Emile Durkheim has called social facts sui generis, social fact par excellence. And in a more modern language, we would say that relations become embedded in a culture. How does this route leads from what happens through what is done to what should be done? I use the term meaning industry to refer to the mechanism of this complex process of crystallization. People talk, exchange opinions, debate about which relations are good and which are bad. The media enter, art joins by means of literature, poetry, films. Philosophy and ethics articulate and systematize the debate. In the negotiations of meanings, the consensus emerges, and some bonds become embedded in the domain of culture. The relations extend now not only to concrete named partners, but to anonymous strangers. Normative pressure is expressed in various positive inducements to those who abide and various negative penalties for deviation. In this way, the cultural moral bond exerts feedback on every concrete individual interaction within the same group, community, or society. The cultural quality of moral bonds provides one additional asset, the long duration. Culture obtains of inertia. It is resistant to change. Once the moral bonds reach a cultural quality, they turn into a lasting tradition inherited from generation to generation. Needless to add, this is the moral space at its strongest. Third, we may investigate the form that moral bonds take. To take the inspiration from Georg Simmel and to use the metaphors from geometry, some relations are linear. They extend like a single line between A and B. Plurality of such interconnected crossing or parallel lines makes a different pattern, a grid or network. This is result in a holistic picture of the whole group, community, or society, which may be compared to a social shape. Collectivities pervaded by moral bonds obtain a specific shape, gestalt, as psychologists used to tell, which is grasped in the vernacular by such terms as good social climate, good social atmosphere, team spirit, esprit de corps, etc. It is only when moral space is deeply rooted in a whole group that it obtains its strongest form. Fourth, there is the question of scope. The scope that the moral bonds embrace. Is it particularistic or universalistic? Universalistic inclusion seems the imperative. In fact, we would refuse the adjective good relations to those which Mark Granovetter and Robert Putnam call integrative, binding, which are exclusive, limited only to a narrow group, the sect, the political party, the mafia, and oriented toward the outside with suspiciousness, disloyalty, exploitation, contempt, hostility. There is no moral space in this case, just the reverse. Edward Benfield, a British social anthropologist, has named it amoral familism. It is only when the relations take the bridging quality, to use Granovetter's and Putnam's term, that the developed moral space appears. After these general considerations concerning the moral space, let me turn back to my list of 6 most important moral bonds: trust, loyalty, reciprocity, solidarity, respect, and justice. And let me submit the main claim of this talk, namely that trust has a spatial rank among them. It is prior, most fundamental, in the sense that all other bonds either presume or imply some measure of trust. What is trust? Trust is our main tool to deal with uncertainty in our relations with others. Dealing with others, we have to gamble. As I define it elsewhere, trust is a bet on the contingent future actions of other people. The bond of trust means the expectation by A of the beneficial actions of B, and the trustworthiness of B means that it has the right to be trusted by A. Metaphorically speaking, trust provides a bridge over the sea of uncertainty. When trust occurs in a single concrete relationship, the partners lower the risk by finding evidence as to their reputation, credentials, performance, and appearance. On the other hand, when trust becomes a normative, cultural precept, a relatively safe expectation may be that even anonymous strangers will be trustful and trustworthy. Trust, whether interactional or cultural, endangers existential security, predictability of the reactions of others, readiness to initiate interactions, to take risks, and to embrace innovation and novelty in all transactions. Its opposite, distrust, produces suspiciousness and anxiety, which are paralyzing for actions and interactions. In that sense, trust makes the core of the moral capital beneficial both for the individuals involved and for the whole groups where relations of trust dominate. The second component of moral space is loyalty. The bond of loyalty means the forfeiting of any harmful action of B toward A, when A trusts B. In this way, loyalty is intimately linked to trust. In fact, it presumes trust. Loyalty makes truster A even more secure, not afraid of initiating interactions, opening oneself toward others, ready for risk and change, as the others are not perceived as threatening. Its opposite, disloyalty, paralyzes actions and interactions as the partners prove not to be worthy of trust. They prove to be untrustworthy. The third component is reciprocity. Some authors believe that this is an innate universal human impulse. Bronisław Malinowski was discovering it among the primitive tribes of Trobriand Islanders. Marcel Mauss considered it as a spontaneous reaction to any received gift. And in sociology, Alvin Guldner was arguing for its central role among other moral precepts. The bond of reciprocity strengthens both earlier bonds by making them mutual. If A trusts B, it creates the obligation to reciprocate on the part of B. It means to trust A. And if B is loyal to A, it creates the obligation to reciprocate on the part of A. It means to be loyal to B. This produces a dense network of relations, opening the chances of cooperation. Anybody recognizing the rule of reciprocity has a right to believe that his or her beneficial actions toward others will sometime be rewarded by reciprocal favors. The opposite of reciprocity is one-sided exploitation, which alienates people from social relations, pushing them toward solitude and building walls instead of bridges toward others. Fourth component is solidarity. The bond of solidarity means the recognition and the allegiance to the idea of a common good, accompanied by the readiness of A to sacrifice some of personal interests for the sake of we, of B, C, D, E, F, etc., the whole group, community, or society. It is the expression of typical human craving for social identity and belonging. And this is the fundamental prerequisite for cooperation. If a rule of solidarity is binding, I have a reason to trust that my disinterested action for the benefit of the community will be paralleled by others' similar actions. If that craving is suppressed by egocentrism, exploitation at the expense of others, or at least by free riding, the atomized society closes itself, builds walls rather than bridges, and is not ready for any risky innovative ventures. Stagnations ensues. Fifth component of the moral space is respect. The bond of respect means the mutual recognition of the achievements of the partners in the currency of praise, fame, prestige, upward mobility, and all sorts of material gratifications. If a bond of respect exists, A can trust that B will gratify his or her achievements, and B may trust similarly in the same action by A. By giving somebody respect and recognition, I express trust that recognition is really due. It means that the respected person has actual and not fake achievements. This strongly encourages the innovative and creative actions which gain respect, and by means of the well-known mechanism of the looking glass self, it raises self-estimate, an important, highly valued benefit for everybody. If recognition and respect are missing, the investment of effort, energy, and time necessary for innovative actions simply does not pay. People drift into resigned pessimism. The last sixth component of moral space is justice. The bond of justice means that the received gratifications are proportional, on the one hand to the effort, and on the other hand to the value of the result. In the normative regime of justice, the person A can trust that the rewards will be distributed proportionally to his or her effort or achievement by B, who commands resources of material and immaterial sort, money, praise, advancements in the job. This encourages the efforts toward novelty because it guarantees reward when innovative actions are undertaken, achieved, when innovative results are obtained, or at least seriously attempted. The propensity toward risky ventures is therefore enhanced. If, on the other hand, distribution of gratification is arbitrary and based on particularistic criteria, for example, nepotism, factionalism, corruption, the motivation toward innovative efforts is destroyed. The six moral bonds are interrelated into a sort of syndrome. They mutually influence and enhance each other, producing a strong tendency for cooperation and vivid experience of a community. But in the syndrome, trust plays a central role. It may be treated as a meta-bond over and above others. To conclude, without some measure of trust, other moral bonds would not exist. Trust is the most valuable asset of the moral capital. It is the mobilizing force of human agency, able to overcome one's limitations, to transgress ourselves and push society forward. It is the foundation on which the edifice of good society stands.